Hey, Scott here from whattype.com, and in this video I want to tackle the topic of INFJs and feeling misunderstood. So I'm a 40-year-old INFJ, and I know all too well what it feels like to be misunderstood. This was kind of my story for most of my life. I grew up in a small town in Rhode Island, and almost my entire extended family are censor judgers. So as a kid, I really felt different from the people in my family and also from most of the people in school. So this is something I'm intimately familiar with. So now, as I stand here today, I have a very different perspective than I did when I was a kid, where I was, kind of stuck in the town I grew up in and could not, find a way to break through, to really relate to my family and feel like they understood me. And, now I live a very different life, and I've learned quite a bit in terms of getting over that frustration of feeling misunderstood. So I just wanted to share some of my tips here. So number one, this is a tough one. This is something that I think a lot of people are invested in. There's some very popular Facebook groups that are all about this, and this is, the tip is to stop glorifying our differences. So there's a tendency for us to kind of take that frustration about feeling misunderstood and, kind of compensate for it by glorifying it, by, how we are these really special unicorns, and, and really leaning into that to the point that it's unbalanced. Now, this is not to say that we're not unique and special, but when we glorify our perceived flaws and try to kind of frame it in such a way that we're special, in a way that separates us from other people, then it's just a trap. So the way out of this, for me, a big part of getting out of this was understanding type. So when we understand how all the different types work and fit together in a functioning society, then we can start to see kind of what our role is in it more objectively, and we can see other perspectives. And when we do that, we can start to learn how to, instead of bashing our heads against the wall, how to relate to other people on their terms. I think a lot of people get hung up on this frustration of, well, why don't other people just understand me the way that I am? And that is a trap. It's a trap that you can be stuck in forever. The way out, instead of just wishing other people were different, is to change your own behavior. So it's being able to learn enough so that you can see the bigger picture, so that you can go meta to the whole thing, and learning the language that other types speak. So, for example, when I was a kid, I would go to like family functions, and all I wanted to do was just go off by myself and watch TV or, whatever. And now, as I gotten older, I've learned to, instead of talking to my I remember one time trying to convince my grandmother that Rage Against the Machine was awesome, which, she grew up in the 1940s. That's not going to work. So, instead of trying to talk to my grandmother about what I was excited about from my perspective, I learned she's an ESFJ. I learned to talk to her about things that she would get excited about, and a lot of it was really interesting. So instead of trying to pull her into my perspective, I would just ask her questions about my grandfather and about growing up, and as I got older, I learned to appreciate these things. I mean, it was really interesting to me to hear a lot of her stories. So it's a self-development exercise when you do this. It's not just to make conversations go better so that it's less annoying to be around sensors. It's actually a really, really valuable self-development exercise to be able to, if you can understand other types, to be able to talk to them about what's interesting to them and to legitimately become interested in what they're saying. This is just a different perspective to adopt. It's much more interesting to talk to people about things that they're genuinely interested in than to try and force something on them that they're not really into. That there's no point. Anytime it feels like you're bashing your head against the wall, there's probably another more constructive approach. And oftentimes that involves getting out of your own perspective and going meta. Another thing that comes to mind on this topic is, I remember when my grandfather passed away. I think it was about 6 years ago or so. I remember thinking that if I didn't understand type, that it would have been a barrier to really appreciating him for the man that he was. He was an ISTJ, and by all accounts, just a man of impeccable character. And I know that had it been maybe 5 years earlier, I probably would have been, there would have been that internal friction of like, why wasn't I more like him? But it's that understanding of type, knowing that he has a different, he had a different role to play. ISTJs are just more, fundamental and fundamentally built to, kind of live in the world as it is. Whereas INFJs, we're born to change things, to mix things up. We have that restlessness inside of us for a purpose. And if and you understand that, then it removes internal friction, and it also allows you to, if you understand it well enough to be able to explain it to other people, and you just own it and you're just cool with it, then that removes a lot of friction. I can explain to other people, why, you have a sense of humor about it. None of us are perfect. Okay, so as I was saying, none of us are perfect. So, as long as we, kind of understand that we're built to do different things, and we can explain that to other people and we understand it ourselves, it just removes a lot of friction. Okay, next tip. So we tend to really feel things very strongly. We tend to feel interpersonal tension very strongly. So part of the way out of the trap of feeling isolated and misunderstood is to learn to deal with this tension, to learn how to, I think a big part of this is the ego. So there's a great book called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, which I highly recommend. And what he talks about in that book, a lot of it comes down to expanding our hearts and being open, and still feeling the discomfort and the emotions and all this stuff, and just remaining open even in difficult situations. And just learning how to accept what is, expand our capacity to deal with discomfort, and instead of running from it, learning to act through it, learning to still do what you need to do. Because if we don't do that, then we're gonna hide. We're gonna hide from discomfort, we're gonna hide from social situations, and we're just gonna feel more isolated. We end up trapped in that whole thing where we're more likely to glorify our flaws, and we'll mentally isolate ourselves. The only way really out of that is going to be to learn how to deal with uncomfortable situations. This takes practice, so I'm a big fan of baby steps. You don't have to jump into extraordinarily uncomfortable situations and do things that are really, really difficult right out of the gate. But, make a little bit of progress, stick with something. If you're, if you have to have an uncomfortable conversation with someone, it's not like it's ever going to be easy, but you can expand your capacity to do that, and you can learn, oh, okay, like I can do this, I can get through this, and then as you get better at it, it feels better. You feel like you're acting with more integrity, you have more authenticity, and that is critical, I think, to being happy and to getting out of this trap of always feeling isolated and misunderstood. Another thing that made a huge difference for me was moving out of the town that I grew up in. So obviously this isn't something you can just do, but it's something to think about long term if you're not happy where you are, if you don't feel like there are a lot of people around you can relate to. For me, it was kind of a mixed bag where I grew up. As I got older, I didn't feel as misunderstood. A lot of this is going to come down to being around other intuitives. So, as I mentioned, it was, my family heavily weighted towards sensors. Where I grew up, it's kind of a mixed bag. But now I live in Hollywood, California, and Hollywood is full of intuitives. There are intuitives all over the place here. So, I feel, totally comfortable here. It's a very different experience. Not that it would be uncomfortable to go back, but it's really nice to just have a lot of people around who you can relate to without having to do too much translation. And then I'll just say, final tip, it's as long as you move in the direction of making some progress, as long as you're taking action and kind of following at least some of the directions of some of the things that I said earlier, it is going to get better over time. We tend to become more well-rounded over time in general. So unless you're really isolating yourself and really hiding, it's going to get easier. So anyhow, I hope those tips helped. If you think that you might be an INFJ, if you're not sure, if you'd like to get clarity on that, you can go to whattype.com/mytype. And if you like this sort of video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks.